Thank you for tuning in for this session of the Media Literacy Discussion Club. I'm Joe Crescente, the host. Please don't be a stranger. Let us know what you thought about this program by liking it or leaving a comment. To join our other AMC Online programs, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, check updates on our website, amc.ru, and follow us on social media to learn, connect, and produce together. How's everybody doing? This week's presentation, we'll go to the first slide, is entitled Pandemics, Anti-Vaxxers, and Confirmation Bias, Media Literacy, and Health Information. Change the slide, please. So it goes without saying that I think everyone has realized just how important health information is lately. Changing the slide. Yet health news is among the least reliable form of information on the internet. Change the slide. Frequently, people share inaccurate information that may reflect their personal beliefs or those that they want to be true. And people are often not as critical of the information as they should be when it comes to health. When I would argue that it's probably the most important information that there is. Changing the slide. According to the MIT Technology Review, quote, health misinformation poses its own challenges, and existing conspiracy theories and false claims are adapting and spreading in the current pandemic faster than fact-checking or sometimes even science can catch up. So I'm going to give you a variety of examples to show you just how I think health misinformation or misunderstandings, sharing, how your confirmation bias is deep, your cultural biases, all this stuff can kind of lead to less than critical health choices as a result of looking, the not having a critical eye when it comes to health information. And we'll start with changing the slide, a little story about Maranda Kelly. Okay, this is based on a true story. I've told this one before, so bear me out if you've heard it before. But Maranda Kelly, changing the slide, is traveling around Russia when she gets sick to her stomach. And she looks at American websites on Google on her phone for advice about what she should do. Keep in mind, Maranda Kelly is alone. She's never been to Russia before. Her Russian is not very good. She's feeling a little bit vulnerable, as many people are, when they're faced with a health crisis of some kind or an emergency. And she's feeling a bit vulnerable, and so she goes to what would look to her to be comforting advice, advice that she's used to in language that she understands very clearly. So she's on American sites on Google on her phone in the middle of the Urals. Changing the slide. So her American websites all tell her, of course they tell her to use American medicine. So she goes to the nearest apteka and she asks for her American medicine. Of course, the Russian pharmacist looks at her strangely, tries to offer her advice, but Kelly ignores the advice of the medical professional in front of her, and she insists on her American medicine. Changing the slide. In the end, the pharmacist gives Kelly the closest thing possible, even though they know a much better and more effective medicine for her to take. So why did Maranda Kelly ignore the advice of the medical professional in front of her? Two reasons, changing the slide. Social trust and confirmation bias. Social trust, I think, social trust and confirmation bias are two of the top things that I refer to again and again in media literacy, because I think they really underpin a lot of what goes on with accepting things that might not necessarily be the best information, might not necessarily be the fullest information, might necessarily be true. And the social trust and confirmation bias are really a big part of two concepts. They're a really big part of media literacy in this respect. So social trust was defined by a Pew Research study in 2007 as a belief in the honesty, integrity, and reliability of others, a faith in the people. Changing the slide, Kaylin O'Connor, a professor of logic and philosophy of science at the University of California, says that 99% of the things you believe, probably you have no direct evidence of yourself, right? You have to trust other people to find those things out, get the evidence, and tell it to you. So we completely live in a world, where we're relying on other human beings. I'm sure that that's not terribly surprising, but I don't think we always think about, where did we hear that? I often think back to the stuff that my grandmother and my mother even told me as a child, and in adulthood, I fact check some of them, and not all of them have scientific consensus. Let's put it that way. But they had, these are kind of like folk traditions maybe that have been passed down in families, and maybe even Italian families, and then American families. To me, all sorts of things, right? That turned out to not necessarily be backed up by hard scientific fact, right? Moving on to what is confirmation bias. It's the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms what you already believe, right? The direct influence of desire and beliefs. I want this to be true, so can I find information that proves that it's true? Something like that. Changing the slide. So back in March, all sorts of questionable medical advice was being shared around on WhatsApp, amongst other places, right? Changing the slide. Secondhand medical expertise is probably one of the most popular categories of misinformation, and perhaps the most worrisome category. During COVID-19, as populations such as the elderly and the isolated are perhaps more vulnerable to such misinformation. Changing the slide. So my 70-something-year-old neighbor here in Moscow, was forwarded the following message, which she received in WhatsApp. She initially shared it, and thinking it was good information, wanted me to make sure. Do you have this information? Are you aware of this? Et cetera, et cetera. And this is largely what it said, as you can see here. For those who can read Russian, right? You have a young doctor from the Russian Federation. This is from months and months ago, right? This is obviously not a current thing being spread around anymore, but it was a young doctor. Yuri Klimov is a young doctor from Russian Federation, working in a hospital in China that was, transformed into a hospital for the study of the virus, and he called his close relatives and wanted them to know everything, right? And it's a very long message, goes on and on, right? And when I asked people about this a few days later on Facebook if they'd seen any similar messages, I got tons of responses from multiple countries, right? I remember seeing stuff from people that showed me stuff from the Netherlands, from Italy, from Ukraine, from Canada, from the United States, all variations on a very similar theme. And what were those themes? Changing the slide. There were some things that give something away, that something might be a little bit off, right? This doctor who the person sending this message to, the doctor is sending this message, is sending it to a person he's never met. All of a sudden, is able to rattle off all sorts of anonymous sources and advice, right? So this person is talking about Taiwanese doctors, Japanese infectious disease specialists, according to recent data, a lot of very vague kind of stuff, right? So if they're such an expert, why are they not appearing? I guess my main questions, having changed the slide, if they're such an expert, why are they not appearing in legitimate sources, right? Why are their sources all anonymous and without any links so that people can check the information they've provided for themselves? And most importantly, instead of going to legitimate sources or even influencers, right? If your goal is to get out information, why are you doing it through WhatsApp messages with all sorts of weird sources that are all anonymous and so on and so forth? Those were the first two things that came to me when I looked at it, right? Changing the slide, secondhand medical expertise is filled with tons of questionable medical advice Such as this one in particular had, such as gargling hot water can help you beat the virus. Keeping your mouth moist is important. It offers different methods for self-diagnosis, none of which you'll find on any government, scientific, or otherwise legitimate website. Changing the slide. The message here, though, was also mixed with some good information, which we'll see a little bit later is really kind of crucial, but it also makes it, particularly, a bit dangerous, right? Fake news outlets often use symbols of mainstream ones, the trappings of different, broadcasts and so on, or, symbols, from print media and so on to gain authority, right? Similarly, by offering familiar tips that sound like that could be true, right? This author, if you want to call them an author, builds trust. It built trust in my neighbor, who's an educated woman, and I know many other people who've seen it and also were like, what's going on here? Is this true? Because there was a lot of there was an information vacuum in the very beginning, in particular in the very beginning of this. Arguably, there still is, in which people didn't know what was good information and what was not good information. So it becomes very easy for people to manipulate populations during these kinds of times. So what happens, changing the slide, when you search for Yuri Klimov, right? You're able to find all sorts of information that kind of suggests that he's less than trustworthy, right? Changing the slide. The giveaway, it is a fake, right? Changing the slide again. Unfortunately, for every one of these posts that, cast doubt on Klimov's expertise, there's another one spreading it. So it's challenging, right? You can try to take something down, but unless, I think we'll see a little bit later, unless, different players kind of with a larger reach than just you and I get involved, it can be very challenging to fight back against misinformation. Changing the slide. So the relationships between autism and vaccines. I'm sure you've probably heard something. I know that this kind of misinformation has been spread in Russia a little bit. Is definitely quite widespread in the United States, a bit so in Europe as well. This idea that there's a very clear relationship between autism and vaccines, meaning you give your children, the vaccines of childhood, and they will contract autism. Honestly, autism is just one of several things that have been suggested by what are called anti-vaxxers, people who are against. Don't believe in the efficacy of vaccinating children because they can lead to a variety of things such as autism, et cetera, et cetera. Largely, there's no scientific proof of that. However, to go back and find the historical roots of this, one of the main reasons to engage in fact checking is to reduce the belief in falsehoods. This being one of them, right? So one widespread example is that of the correlation between vaccines and the acquisition of autism in young children. In 1997, a paper was published in a prestigious medical journal in the UK that was later discredited and retracted from publication. The doctor who published this research initially even lost his medical license for promoting falsehoods. So this doctor, perhaps, you could say that they're confirmation bias. They wanted this to be true, so they fudged the numbers, right? They forged some of the numbers and some of the data in order to make it appear that there was this relation. There was a correlation between vaccines and autism in young children, and it cost him his medical career. Changing the slide. However, in the meantime, the idea that vaccinating your children significantly increased the risk of giving your children autism took hold, playing on society's then lack of knowledge about autism and parental fears about their children having medical complications with serious consequences. Changing the slide, this rumor spread until fact checkers banded together to disrupt this myth, and it took a lot of effort and many years. However, unfortunately, in recent years, in the United States at least, fewer children have been vaccinated, which has led to some outbreaks with serious consequences. And we're at a time where, I think a lot of people are going to be asked to get a vaccine in the very near future. Hopefully it's very near. So this is going to be, this is going to play out. And this is literally an example of, people not fact checking stuff quick enough before these kinds of myths seeped into the popular consciousness. And of course, it's a small percentage of people who will not vaccinate their children, but it's enough that it causes concern amongst the scientific community. The good news at the very bottom here is that this correlation is almost never left unchallenged in the media anymore, right? So going to the next slide. So here's a little story about how this kind of works, adapted from a national public radio podcast. A new mother, Maranda, heard a story from her midwife, that she couldn't get out of her head. The midwife told her that years earlier, something bad had happened after she had vaccinated her son. 1 minute he was fine, and the next he was autistic. It was like the light had left his eyes, Maranda recalls her saying. The Maranda implored Maranda to go online and do her own research, so she did, changing the slide. She started on Google. It led her to Facebook groups where other moms echoed what the midwife had said, changing the slide. They were bombarding me with information, says Maranda, telling me, your midwife's right. That is why I don't vaccinate. This is what happened to my child who I did vaccinate versus my child who I didn't vaccinate. Things like that, changing the slide. Maranda trusted them. She says it wasn't long before she had decided she wasn't going to vaccinate her child either, changing the slide. Eventually, she did more research and realized that the purported link between vaccines and autism wasn't real. She changed her mind and vaccinated her daughter. But looking back, she can't believe how easy it was to embrace beliefs that were false, changing the slide. It is so easy to Google, what if this happens, and find something that's probably not true, Maranda says. Don't do that. Changing the slide. So just a couple words on search terms, right? You can often set yourself up for failure, right? If you search for, is the earth flat? You will discover that the earth is flat, right? Just like Maranda searched, does autism, cause, does vaccinating your children lead to autism? If you put that into Google. Fortunately, Google, and some other search engines have gotten very, kind of like they're aware, they monitor various myths and kind of misinformation out there, and they've started to catch up a little bit. So actually, most recent times that I've tried to search for a relationship between autism and vaccines, it's much more challenging to find the information that Maranda was able to find, say, 5 years ago, perhaps when she was doing those kinds of searches. The search engines have caught up to some extent, but these kinds of things, they get these kinds of misinformation. Just like a virus, it mutates. It finds different ways to get around this, and it's hard to keep up. It's hard to stay on top of all these things. So changing the slide, people often search for the answer they want, not the information they need, right? Remember, Google and other search engines, they're a business, not a librarian, so please remember this. They are giving you free information, but not necessarily the best information. Changing the slide. So if you want to step outside of your media bubble, to try to really find, for lack of a better term, objective information to the best of your ability, you should search for something you do not know the answer to, right? So searching for like something that you can answer with a yes, no is not going to give you something. If you search instead, like, for what are the impacts of vaccinations on X, then you're going to get what are the impacts, what are the effects. You're going to get probably a lot more description than yes, you shouldn't do this, or no, you shouldn't do that, kind of thing. So spend a little time, and if you're not satisfied with your search, on a search engine the first time, try 3-4 times. You'll get it right, but it can take some effort. This is something I definitely work on with students when they're, when I used to teach in the university, as regards to term papers and research papers and so on and so forth. It is a bit of a skill, and it's a really good one to have, and it is really useful to have way beyond the university. It is not just something you need there. It is something you can use in your everyday life. So we get to the kind of like the headliner of this presentation, the plandemic, which for me was kind of like the most interesting maybe is not the right word, but the most bright example, Yarki Primer, right? So for the last kind of week and a half. So I'll tell you what the pandemic is, right? A video appeared in early May on YouTube, so very recent, about the pandemic, which offered a view of COVID-19 that differs from the official narrative. In it, filmmaker Mickey Willis conducts a largely uncritical interview with Judy Mikovits, who he describes as one of the most accomplished scientists of her generation. By uncritical interview, what do I mean? Just like, as they've said often in in media studies, right? Lobbing softballs, right? A good journalist or a good interviewer should be asking difficult questions, especially of experts, right? To try and get the best answers. But in this case, the person interviewing Judy Mikovits is just really asking basically yes/no questions rather than asking complicated questions, just as like the search engine example plays right here. Really asking her questions in which this person could give, the answers that she wants to give. So he wasn't even really in control. He was kind of aiding and abetting in many ways the person he was interviewing. So to change the slide, this is kind of a still from the interview, just to take a look at it. The interviewer is on the right, the scientist with the glasses on the left. That's the Judy Mikovits, exposing Dr. Fauci, who's is one of the leading, if not the leading, infectious disease specialist in the United States. Has been very involved in the United States response. Changing the slide. So the pandemic. The video got millions of views very quickly. Very quickly, right? It's I think I can't remember. I couldn't find the exact date that it premiered because it's really almost no longer there at all. But it's within the last 2 weeks for sure. I think it was May 2nd, May 1st, 2nd, somewhere around there that it premiered. It got over 1 million views, but was taken down by YouTube for violating YouTube's medical misinformation policies. We'll get to that a little bit later as to what goes into that. I was able to view it last week, but it's really almost impossible to find now, even off of YouTube. It's also been removed by Facebook, Vimeo, and Twitter. Now, the most intrepid amongst you probably can find it, I'm sure, out there. Somebody, but they're being quite aggressive in removing this video. It is a bit surprising, but it was very impactful, and it was getting a lot of views, and it was getting shared a lot on social media platforms. So why was it so controversial? Some of the main assertions in the video are, it's about a 26-minute video, just a little more background, right? And it's 26-minute video. It says it's Plandemic Part 1, and the idea is that there's going to be a full-length film that would be released this summer. And actually, in the first 8 minutes of the video, it's mostly setting up the protagonist, right, Judy Mikovits, setting her up as kind of like why she's important, why she should be trusted, before she even gets into the assertions, her main assertions in the video about COVID-19 and vaccinations, right? She says in the video that vaccines are, quote, a money-making enterprise that causes medical harm. She asserts that the virus was manipulated. There are claims that hospitals in the US can bill significantly more money to insurers if there's a COVID-19 diagnosis. Flu vaccines increase the chance of contracting COVID by 36%. Changing the slide. Also, if you've ever had a flu vaccine, you're injected with coronaviruses. Wearing a mask can actually cause harm. And I tried really hard to understand the science behind it, but I struggled. To be honest, basically, it gets, anyway, if you're really interested in it, you can find out a billion articles about it. And I do have a lot of links at the very end or some of the resources I consulted for this presentation. So you're welcome to go and do your own research for sure. And also suggest that Bill Gates may have had a hand in creating the disease in order to profit from an eventual vaccine, which is one of the large, the main kind of, it's up, the Bill Gates kind of participation is up there with the 5G, causes COVID-19. They're two of the main myths that I think we've seen in recent months revolving around COVID-19. Changing the slide. So who is Judy Mikovits, right? She is an anti-vaxxer. No matter what she says in the video, she's an anti-vaxxer for sure. She's a discredited research scientist due to scientific misconduct, and she has become well known in recent years for her promotion of conspiracy theories. Changing the slide. So what she claims. Mikovits claims that in a 2009 paper, she's among 13 researchers who claim to have found that a mouse retrovirus may contribute to chronic fatigue syndrome. In the video, the filmmaker, the guy doing the interview, Willis, says the paper sent shockwaves through the scientific community, and as it revealed the common use of animal and human fetal tissues were unleashing devastating plagues of chronic diseases. However, 2 years after its publication, the paper was retracted by the authors, an unusual occurrence in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. Very similar to what happened in the paper from 1997 in Great Britain that was also retracted. That initially tried to claim that there was a correlation between vaccination in children and autism. Changing the slide. So what happened? Science, it's a magazine unsurprisingly about science, wrote at the time that, quote, multiple laboratories, including those of the original authors, have failed to reliably detect, quote, unquote, the mouse retrovirus in chronic fatigue syndrome patients. In addition, there is evidence of poor quality control and a number of specific experiments in the report. Scientific misconduct, right? Not a great job. And scientists, get a lot of respect, when they do very good jobs, but they can lose it very quickly when you have poor research kind of habits like this. Changing the slide. So the second controversy involving Mikovits was being fired from Whitmore Peterson Institute, a laboratory located on the University of Nevada campus in Reno, where she was the research director. So she was a significant scientist for sure. But the lab claimed that that Mikovits wrongfully removed lab notebooks and other proprietary information. Okay, changing the slide. So this is how Mikovits claims, kind of describes her demise, so to speak. In the Plandemic film, she relates her arrest over the incident, saying she was held in jail without charges. I was called a fugitive from justice. She mentions, this is what she says about footage of what appears to be describing a police SWAT team executing a nighttime raid. So there's images of a SWAT team, right? Basically like the equivalent of special forces coming in and getting her and taking her out of house. There's images of this, and above that, she's narrating what's happening, right? No warrant. They literally dragged me out of the house. Our neighbors are looking at what's going on here, right? Changing the slide. But according to local sources, she turned herself into authorities in Reno. And here's the source from 2011 that details her arrest. As you can see, Judy Mikovits turns herself in. So you can also do your own research about that if you'd like to. So this is somebody who's got a bit of an exaggeration problem at best, right? So what does the video do? So most basically all those things that I discussed before are really they're not scientifically accurate. And in some ways they might just be made up and untrue. What the video uses, right, to get its points across, right? It uses slick high production values, right? Going back to what I mentioned, right? Fake news or misinformation often uses the trappings of mainstream media, right? To convince viewers that it's a legitimate source, right? So in this case, it looks and feels very much like a professionally produced, expensively made documentary film, right? It uses persuasion and storytelling. It uses uncritical interviewing. Uncritical interviewing, once again, is just like when basically an interviewer allows the interviewee to control the situation. So rather than asking hard questions, they're just asking very soft questions that may or may not even be, kind of coordinated in advance, so that the person who is being interviewed can tell the story exactly as they want to tell it. It plays into existing mistrust in certain parts of the population of big pharma, big pharmaceutical companies, and the federal government. And as well as it plays onto the, this confusion and mixed signals of reporting that are going on right now. So it uses that to its advantage. Saw an opening, and it got in there. The video spread pretty quickly. Fortunately, I guess the large social media companies were able to see its impact very quickly and removed it. So it's really hard to find. So changing the slide. Also, Mikovits, denies being an anti-vaxxer in the video. She's asked, "Are you an anti-vaxxer?" And she says, "No, I'm not an anti-vaxxer." But this really does contradict actually many of her statements made outside of the video. And to the average viewer seeing this for the first time, who've never heard of her, most people haven't, right? That might seem reassuring. But denial in order to gain followers is a common tactic of this, movement, or whatever you want to call it. Whether we're talking about anti-vaxxers or others who are trying to push various bits of, misleading health information. Denial, lying, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Changing the slide. So why YouTube and then other companies acted the way they did? And I got this from the MIT Technology Review. And there'll be a link to this article as well as I mentioned, many other articles at the end of the presentation. So YouTube is a quote, "YouTube has introduced some attempts to counterbalance health misinformation in the last year, for example, by surfacing authoritative sources in some search results, adding information panels to some videos, and working to remove those that violate its evolving list of policies about such false claims. But the pandemic has heightened the urgency and raised the stakes. As COVID-19 took hold, YouTube introduced specific policies prohibiting videos that question the transmission or existence of the disease, promote unsubstantiated cures, or encourage people to ignore official guidance." Right? Changing the slide. This is a debate for another time, right? But in the United States, right, the First Amendment guarantees freedom of speech. It doesn't guarantee it everywhere. It's still a question, a work in progress type of question. Is YouTube, a guaranteed federal right in the United States? Does it, you may have the right to say something, but if a channel like YouTube, which is a private business, doesn't necessarily guarantee you the right to, say. That's anyway a debate for another time. Some issues I definitely would be interested in discussing potentially in another presentation. Changing the slide. So according to an article in Forbes magazine, once again, there will be a link to this article at the end of the presentation. This video has been extremely successful at promoting misinformation for 3 reasons. First, it taps into people's uncertainty, anxiety, and the need for answers, common reasons anyone is attracted to a conspiracy theory. Second, it is packaged very professionally and uses common conventions people already associate with factual documentaries. And thirdly, it successfully exploits ancient but extremely effective methods of persuasion. Changing the slide. So continuing on from this article in Forbes magazine, what's most upsetting to many people is who they see sharing it, right? Reasonable, intelligent people who normally don't fall for conspiracy theories or pseudoscience. Many people who are privately or casually sharing it are saying, "This is interesting. What do you think of it?" Most genuinely don't know what to make of it, right? They aren't trying to spread misinformation. They're taken in by the video's slick appearance and by its use of persuasive techniques and really want to know what you think. So you need to approach them respectfully about it. So we're going to go into changing slides. Some of the, in the rest of the presentation, some of the kind of strategies that are used in the video, and some things you can do to kind of counteract misinformation when you encounter it. So this video successfully employs pathos and ethos to persuade people, right? A couple of great Greek terms. So just to remind you, ethos is an appeal to the credibility and authority of the speaker, how they come across, and pathos is an appeal to emotions. So in the video, how is ethos used, right? The video doesn't make a scientific argument or mention COVID-19 in the beginning, right? The only purpose of the first 8 to 10 minutes is to get the audience to trust Mikovits, right? So it's an appeal to the credibility and the authority of the speaker, right? They build up the speaker. It was a very slickly produced video. They make her seem like she's an expert who's been wronged, and she's got all these credentials. She's a major scientific figure. She's a martyr. All sorts of things she could do. They definitely spend a good chunk of real estate, for lack of a better term, in the first third of that video, making you believe Mikovits is somebody you can trust, right? So how does you use pathos? This is an example of how it uses it, right? The video appeals to viewers' emotions by portraying Mikovits as a victimized underdog and repeatedly uses stock video of harrowing images such as patients dying from AIDS and malnourished children in Africa, right? So it's using all sorts of scientific challenging and harrowing situations in order to appeal to the viewer's emotions. Right? Changing the slides. So if you do come across this article, or I think this is widely applicable advice for misinformation, not even just health misinformation, but definitely this article, definitely this video, but other forms of health misinformation for sure. And I think any other kinds of misinformation you encounter. This is some things it recommends you could do. So the first being, don't denigrate the video, right, or make fun of it, right, or say this is crazy. What are you doing? What are you stupid? Don't mock someone for sharing it, right? Does not suggest doing any of these things. Don't insist that people, what are you doing? You have to delete this immediately. Don't watch this. This is terrible. It recommends not doing these things. This just makes it, forbidden fruit, which is all the more attractive. This is definitely good advice. Whether or not, I would definitely try it out. Whether or not it's going to work is another story. But I think there is definitely a tendency to do both of these things online. I see it all the time, both amongst acquaintances and friends, as well as just people I follow on social media. Right? Somebody says something someone disagrees with. They say you're wrong. Delete it. Encourage other people to block this person or something and so on. I don't think that's an effective strategy, I don't know that it necessarily solves anything. There are different things you can do for different situations for sure, but engagement is probably a better strategy than isolation. So going forward, the person probably shared the video. To the next slide. The person probably shared the video because they probably want your opinion, because they trust you, right? Let's say they shared it with you by WhatsApp, or they've shared it on your Facebook page, for example. So don't violate. They recommend not violating that trust right off the bat. Use it instead, right? How you use it depends on what you know about this person and what's worked in the past, right? So I can use my father as an example. He trusts me enough to listen to me when I share things. So I don't go, Dad, what are you doing? Don't you know? I don't do that stuff with him. Instead, I say, let's examine some of the facts here, right? I appreciate the fact that he's actually, come to me with something and he's asking my opinion. So, there's a little bit of trust built up. We've got this capital built up. I don't want to just spend it immediately by saying, I can't believe you're sharing this, right? Instead, what I do is I say, Dad, look, this source is not a good source, for example, and then I show him, here's some information about this source that shows that this is maybe not the best source. These are the people who fund it. This is their agenda. This is their mission, and so on and so forth. B, look at this. This is very general information, and I go through it, and I go through this stuff with him, and he walks away, and, I think I make progress with him, slowly but surely in that way. So maybe this is a strategy for you, if somebody shares something with you. Changing the slide. So you might ask people what they find so persuasive about the video or any other piece of misinformation or potential misinformation, and move on from there, addressing those specifics, just like I have done with my father, for example. You could also discuss how to know whether Mikovits really is an expert or not, right? Instead of just dropping a link, explain that it's impossible for her to be an expert in all the different topics she covers in the video. That's not how scientific expertise works, right? As I pointed out before, right? I think the main problem with cable television in the United States is that they bring in these pundits, these talking heads, to be experts on 5 billion things, when they're usually a specialist in one very specific field, or they look for general experts who can comment on everything from climate change to economics to to trade to globalization to politics and so on. But especially with scientific information, you definitely want somebody who is a very narrow specialist. Scientists are by nature not somebody who will admit to expertise that they don't have, which is something that Mikovits does in that video. So changing the slide. So they also ask in the article, the Forbes article, does speaking up even matter? Will it make a difference? And they argue, yes, it will. So this is what they've said. I'll just read out. Others see you push, surely responding to the false statements ethos, right? You're appealing to people, right? You're appealing to their smarts. You're trying to be persuasive, right? It is true, right? People generally when they share something and other people only see people who share with them. They don't feel like very empowered. They feel like, well, maybe that's true. Nobody's fighting back. Nobody's contradicting this person. So just by politely, perhaps you're wading into some challenging waters. Admittedly, social media is not always the nicest place. And if you're the only person who's fighting back, you might get some kind of involved and roped into some kind of social media battle that you didn't want to. So just know that going in. But some of the positives, others will see that you're doing this, and that could encourage them as well to question the misinformation that's being shared, and could have a positive effect on the situation. Changing the slide. Seeing you speak up erodes the bystander effect, typically used to explain why people are less likely to help in an emergency if others are around. So there's this very classic case in the United States. If you read very carefully into it, not everything happened exactly as it was initially reported, but the moral of the story is there was somebody who was attacked. 100 people, many dozens of people saw that. Many dozens of other people saw it from their balconies and their windows. It was happening in a large city in New York, and apparently nobody. The initial story was that nobody called the police because they assumed somebody else would take care of it. So that's the bystander effect, right? So, for example, if someone makes a racist comment and no one speaks up, others don't want to be the first, right? So be the first, they suggest. It can inspire and embolden other people to push back on their walls too. Speaking against misinformation is contagious in a good way. If you do it, they realize they can and should too. And if they don't know what to say before, they can copy paste what you said and use that, right? Now, admittedly, there have been times you have to be prepared. I encourage you to be prepared. Sometimes when you wade into some challenging waters about misinformation, that can have not so positive impacts on your mental health, because people can get quite vicious when you contradict them. But if you think about the long view, and that you might be potentially undermining some of that misinformation. It could be worth it, but definitely I want you to have full awareness of what can happen when you do get involved in trying to counter misinformation online. Continuing, speaking up normalizes factual information and contributes to the mere exposure effect, right? The more a person is exposed to an idea, the more it becomes familiar and credible, no matter what the idea is. The more they hear it from you and others over and over, the more they may gradually, unconsciously, start to recognize the logical holes and embrace factual information. It won't happen overnight or because of one person, but they'll think it was their idea. When it happens, it can happen. So changing the slide. So I'll just give you one recent example of something that I found online, and I didn't, how I was able to undermine it, right? So I saw this. It was shared by somebody in the United States who I'm Facebook friends with. I've deleted their information here, but so as not to embarrass the friend for sharing this. Good for information I wasn't aware of. Please share a bit in public. Basically, it's information about medical masks. It basically goes on. You're supposed to use it. The colored side does one thing. The non-colored side does another thing. I'd never heard this before, but I saw it, shared in a few different places. And I was just like, is this, who originally shared this? Because this was shared by a friend on Facebook, but they were not the initiator of this information. Who was it? It was this guy. Should we be taking advice from this guy, Tony Picozzi, who works at RP Electrical and Martin Electric, right? Studied at Berkeley College. I don't know if that's a joke or an intentional misspelling. I assume it's an intentional. I assume it's an intentional misspelling and a joke rather than just a bad mistake. But probably not an expert in masks. And I don't even know what the purpose of this is. Is it just trying to further show us that we don't know anything really about medical stuff, or to make us be even more confused about the very nervous times that we already live in, when we're not sure what to do with our groceries when we get home. This just adds further fuel to that kind of uncertainty and nervousness and anxiousness that I think a lot of people feel around the world regarding the virus. And this is the guy, Tony Picozzi, who shared it, who's probably not an expert, I assume. But anyway, I decided to do a quick search, changing the slide, and I would not call these perfect, sites, but they're a good start. And if you can find somebody's trying to debunk something, it usually means, and somebody's taken the time to try to debunk something, there's probably a lot of truth to it. So I was able to find very quickly a couple of sites, explaining why a blue side and a white side, and also referring to the two-sided surgical mask hoax. So if you want to, you can do, kind of a search on that particular thing. But, basically, you're probably wearing your mask as you're supposed to. And if somebody tries to tell you otherwise, who's not, a highly qualified specialist, they're probably, I don't even know if it's a joke. I don't know if they just believe it. I don't know if they're just trying to sow further confusion amongst people. I don't know what the exact. To try to just show, hey, please don't start, using medical equipment incorrectly. Changing the slide. Probably better to listen to a medical organization like the WHO and something like this. Right here, they've got a, how to, with pictures, how to wear a medical mask safely poster. So, what you're supposed to do at all steps of the process. Probably this is a lot better information than taking information from our good friend Tony Picozzi. So I'm going to leave you with two final quotes, changing the slide, and then we'll go to some questions. The virologist Peter Piot, director of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, says, quote, "Today, there's also the paradox that these are kind of food for thought, just leaving you with some food for thought. Today, there's also the paradox that some people who owe their lives to vaccines no longer want their children to be vaccinated. That could become a problem if we want to roll out a vaccine against the coronavirus, because if too many people refuse to join, we will never get the pandemic under control." And to go to the final slide, also remember, this is something written by the Dr. Emily Willingham, a science journalist and developmental biologist. Some people with advanced degrees are perfectly willing to ally their expertise or overreach or their claims just to get attention. That applies to people like Judy Mikovits, and that applies to your educated friends on Facebook who are sharing something. Fact check everybody is my moral of the story. So with that, I will give you the resources. I'll leave these up on the screen. Robert, please leave these up on the screen. Each of them, there's 3 slides for 10 seconds so that people can go back later and find this information. Actually, what I'll do is maybe I'll even put them in the comments here. I'll do that immediately following the presentation for you. So there's how many? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 articles that I used for this presentation. A lot of good information on how to handle misinformation regarding health. In particular, regarding the video that I mentioned, the pandemic and coronavirus. So I'll put those in the comments as soon as we're done with this presentation. But as for now, thank you for your attention, and I am ready to take any questions that you may have. Okay. So I got a comment from Alia K. It says, thank you so much for this interesting and insightful information in times of crisis like we have now. Like we have now, it is really important to double check everything. That is definitely the case. I think one of the most best things you can do, like the first thing I did this last time I was talking to my father, we talk every week. I asked him if he's seen this video, and he said no. I think it's important, especially if you have concerns about media consumption habits of relatives or people is just ask them what they've seen and come at it. I've found success only when I've taken an approach of trying to understand why. A lot of times my dad shares things because he wants to hear what other people have to think. It doesn't necessarily always come from a place of I'm right and you're wrong. I think a lot of people see it that way, or they see it, or it really doesn't jibe well with their confirmation bias or their media bubble, where 100% of everybody they know says things in a very similar way. When they see something that's very different than that, they think, well, this person is absolutely false and fake, and they have bad intentions. And I think it's much more productive to, just try to, listen to the person, hear them out, and, if you can, and, try to let them know of better information sources or other sources. Sometimes listening is all they want, actually. And if once you listen to them, then you can inform them. You've gained their trust, and you can inform them maybe of better information. Doesn't always work, like I've said, but if you feel like you've got trust with somebody, use that trust to try to improve people around you's media consumption habits. Another comment from Galina Yevtushenko. Thank you so much, very interesting. Thank you for listening, Galina. Oh, so I got another question from Maria K. What international media do you rely on while reading about health issues? I don't think there's a difference between reading on health issues and reading on general news media. I think the most important thing is don't, especially in time. It's good to develop a coterie of good sources, right, that you trust, right. So all the sources that I was about to share, of them, I really felt like I trusted most of them. So as soon as the presentation's done, I'll share the resources from this presentation. But one of them was the MIT Technology Review. I've looked at them many times. I trust this source. The Atlantic magazines is another source that I trust. Forbes, another source I've trusted. Use them. And then there's also, there was something from Lifehacker, which I did have to investigate a little bit. WHO, obviously, the World Health Organization. And then I got something from Facebook that was mentioned in one of the articles and is by a scientist, just with some useful information. But I'd say generally the sources I use for health information do not vary much from the sources that I use for other kinds of information. I think the most important thing is be aware of the sources that you're looking at, and develop. You should be able to, if you're a frequent media user, be able to quickly understand if this is a good source or not a good source, and work out from there. So I think the simple answer to your question is spend a lot of time trying to get to know certain sources, build up a library of maybe 5-6 sources that you really trust that you can go to, get to know them really well, get to know the the journalists that write for them, get to know their approaches, get to trust them, build a relationship with them, so that whenever you have an issue that you want to know more about, you can go to them. And you can, largely trust them. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be skeptical. You should always be skeptical of any information you have, regardless of, the publication. For example, I still always have a little bit of skepticism, just out of natural habit. Even when I'm reading stuff like the New York Times, which I've been reading, honestly, for like almost 30 years, just because, they're humans, and human journalists, they make mistakes from time to time. So if you see something that's a little bit out of place, double check it. Do a quick Google search or fact check it in other ways. Okay, so we want to thank you for tuning in for this session of the Media Literacy Discussion Club. I will post the resources in the comments here in just a second. Don't be a stranger. Let us know what you thought about this program by liking it or leaving a comment. And to join our other AMC Online programs, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, check updates on our website, amc.ru, and follow us on social media to learn, connect, and produce together. Hope everybody is, stays safe and healthy out there all around the world. See you next week.